to prove that there's no foreign influence in this one.
We pay for this mosque ourselves. Look me, Muhammad Allah, 30 euros. Saeed, 30 euros. We have no outside help in funding this mosque. No Saudi help. This mosque is funded solely by us, poor laborers. We don't even need instructions from Spanish government to report on these people. We'll report them to the authorities ourselves. If we have the slightest suspicion that someone with terrorism on his mind is trying to enter our mosque, we would refuse entry and report him straight away.
You don't think that up to now, and in the future, there's a danger that Muslims in Spain will be blamed, will become victims in some way for March the 11th?
No, I don't think so, because it hasn't happened, and it could have happened immediately after the bombings. The Spanish society has not blamed Muslims as a whole, not ever, and I don't think they will in the future.
The truth is, though, that tensions between the two communities have spilled over into violence before. In the Costa Blanca town they call Little Morocco. Then it followed a brawl in a market. El Ejido is where a host of Moroccans have washed up illegally to toil in the sea of plasticos, greenhouses that grow vegetables.
Hello and welcome to Dateline London. In today's programme, how should Muslim girls dress in Western schools? Terrorism in Saudi Arabia and in Iraq, plus why President Bush still seems to believe in significant links between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda when his own Presidential Commission of Inquiry into 9/11 doesn't think much of the idea. But first, the European Union's new constitution. Here to discuss it are Fred Kemp of the Wall Street Journal, Shahid Sadullah of Pakistan's Daily Jang, Tina Van Houts of Holland's NOS, and Richard Stott of the Sunday Mirror. Good to see you all. It's 300 or so pages long, took years to produce, and its arrival drew nearly as many news stories as the latest Harry Potter novel, only no one expects it to become an international bestseller. It is, of course, the new constitution for the European Union, setting out how 25 countries will get along in the foreseeable future. Some see it as a strong diplomatic victory for new Europe, including Britain, and a big setback for the old Europe of France and Germany. How important is all this, and can British voters learn to love it? Richard, first of all, is this a big deal and a big victory for Tony Blair?
I think it's a big deal. I mean, whether it's a big victory for Tony Blair, we won't know until after he has won or lost a referendum. I think there is all to play for. I don't think that it's finished. I don't think that people are going to reject it necessarily. He's now got to get out and do what he hasn't done so far, which is to sell the pro-European case. I mean, during the Euro elections, Tony Blair was conspicuous by his absence. He didn't make one speech, and the case for has gone by default. And in this country, the whole Euro debate is run entirely by the redneck right-wing press, who say that we're losing our sovereignty and all that sort of thing. Now, this isn't necessarily so, and it is now up to Tony Blair to put this case properly. The fact that it is worth £23 billion a year to us, and the only alternative is to pull out, and that would be unthinkable.
Shahid?
Well, it is a big deal purely in an editorial sense, Gavin. I mean, getting 80,000 pages into 333 pages is a big deal. I do think that the Constitution is sellable, but we haven't yet had an informed debate on the subject. The debate has mostly been around sort of superficial and entirely emotional issues. I mean, Mr. Kilroy still coming and saying things like, I want my country back, means absolutely nothing. I think now the point has to be made that Germany and France now are not the same powers in the European Union that they were some time back. There are 10 other countries that have come. There is a new Europe. That said, the new Europe sometimes reminds me of the Pakistan cricket team of the early 1980s, Imran Khan and 10 others. You know, it's there, we with a few others. I do not know exactly how much clout that new Europe is going to have. That is something which only time is going to tell. But it is going to be a moderating influence. It is not a group that will be able to get its own way, but it will be able probably to stop others from getting their own way, especially as far as they are concerned. But an informed debate on the issue has got to start. My fear is that it might not start for some time to come, till we have a general election in this country, because it could well be that Mr. Blair might think it's not worth going into till then.
Well, exactly, because you could say that, Tina, that the whole idea of having a referendum on the European Constitution, which Mr. Blair adopted somewhat reluctantly, is a way of taking it off the agenda for at least the next year till he gets re-elected, he would hope.
Well, of course, and he's been able to have it off the agenda for 7 years. While he was elected, he kept telling how pro-European he was. So far, in 7 years, we've only had a few words, not many, and very few deeds. So, and we've also seen in the past that the whole European issue has never featured very high in British general elections at all. So the question is, will the opposition and the UKIP keep the whole thing alive during an election campaign? That is very, very difficult to predict.
Because there's an interesting phenomenon here, isn't it? That people care about it greatly, and many people don't really bother that much. That seems to be the way it goes, so that the UK Independence Party really is very passionate about it, whereas many other people, it's healthcare and social services and so on are much more important issues.
Yeah, and general election never cares, but it never really matters. But of course, for British prime ministers personally and their own personal political career and survival, Europe has always mattered a great deal. And it's quite fair to say that both for John Major and for Thatcher, Europe was the beginning of the end of their power. And with Blair, of course, that might happen as well, because the Labour Party is split on it. The first opinion polls have said so. And the thing is, when Tony Blair says it's time to divide between myth and reality, Tony Blair has also been very, very guilty of using the myth of dangerous Europe whenever it suits him. I mean, the first thing that should stop is really the amateur stage in Brussels, you know, the so-called fights between the French leader and Tony Blair, you know.
Which serves both sides
exactly,
very
you know,
well.
shall we just give up on that? If they promise to sort of be serious about it, then at least that's a step forward, I think.
Well, Fred, you're a European editor of the Wall Street Journal, right, I should say, so you see this in your hat in Brussels all the time. I mean, is a lot of it quite phony, the rounds?
It's not phony. I mean, this is very important. Europe is a process, and this is a very important part of the process. But Giscard d'Estaing, who was heading up this constitution, said it was going to give Europe the political power to speak with an equal voice on the world stage with the greatest powers. That, of course, means with the United States and with China and with others. The question is, what will they say? Would Europe have been for or against the Iraq War? Back then, a qualified majority might have gone for the war if you look at the positions at that time. Will this Europe in this constitution be for or against greater free market systems and more competitiveness? Which way will it go? It has to decide what it stands for. But one thing is clear in this round. All the battles that we saw in the last couple of days were about power struggle, what coalitions are going to run this year. What's clear is it's not going to be the French any longer. They're not going to get their way. They didn't get their way on the presidency, and they didn't get their way fully on the Constitution. On the other hand, however, this Constitution isn't as good as Blair is painting it right now. Businessmen have already come out against it. Yesterday, British businessmen, a whole slew of them, saying you really haven't protected us on labor and taxes as much as you said you have. And so you're going to see a big struggle over the referendum, long way before this actually becomes a constitution.
A lot of points there, Richard, but the one big one which does strike me, and which is has tended to be undercovered here, is this progressive dilution of French power over the years within Europe. That however Europe is being fashioned in the future, it is not in the image of Giscard d'Estaing, is it?
No, and this is one of the reasons why Thatcher, of course, was always in favour of more members, that it would dilute French power. That means that you're going to eventually have to completely reform the common agricultural policy, for example, which is a stain on Europe and has been for years and years and years. I mean, it's all very well the businessman complaining about the labour laws that are coming out, but you look at the state of the British labour industry at the moment, and the bosses getting richer and richer, and the workers on short-term contracts, low pay, long hours, the longest hours in Europe. It's hardly surprising that the trades unions are getting up in arms against this.
Although Richard, the unemployment is lower, the growth is greater, the productivity is good. I mean, England has surpassed. It used to be that France had a better functioning economy than England if you don't remember too far back. That isn't the case any longer. And we're in a situation right now where England does have to fear about Europe. First of all, it has to be in to be competitive. It has to be part of this market. But on the other hand, it has to maintain its tax and its labor competitiveness within this market. The model for Eastern Europe, the model for Central and Eastern Europe, the new models isn't France. It's Ireland, or it's Finland, or it's England. What's really going to be interesting is this declining power of the French. There's a lot of bluster right now, but I think it's really whistling in the dark for the French, because they see over time the coalitions won't be built around them any longer. They may well be built around the Germans, who are much closer to the new members. And as soon as Gerhard Schröder separates himself from Jacques Chirac, he may find that he has a lot more power than
new Ostpolitik from the Germans.
Absolutely, a new sort of Ostpolitik.
Yeah, I'm not convinced either about this great economic miracle here. I mean, it would be very nice to believe it was so, but you look what our economy is based on and our wealth is based on. It's based on hugely overheated and overpriced houses, and it's built on a raft of plastic debt, you know, £1 trillion. Now, that to me is a bit iffy. Our manufacturing industry is virtually non-existent, and our exports are largely based on invisibles.
But you also get a lot more foreign direct investment than France or Germany, because this is a place where foreign companies.
And we're also taking a lot more out into the other countries of Europe.
The interesting thing is, of course, that we can debate about this all the time, but the European Constitution actually doesn't solve this. You know, the whole thing about, you know, are people allowed to go on strike or not, the human rights, that sort of thing. The Constitution says something like, these details, are paraphrased, will be decided by the European courts or the national courts. So it will be a very, very long time, actually, you know, which will be tested in various courts till we actually know which way the Constitution is going.
I think some people would say, thank goodness for that, because the one thing that really strikes me, Shahid, is that the British view in general, I would have thought, and certainly the North American view of what a constitution is for, is to prevent governments from doing things. And clearly from Giscard and others, the view of this constitution is it's to enable a government or Europe to do things. And insofar as it fails to do that, the British will see it as a victory.
Yes, but at the same time, I mean, if you have a constitution which sort of spreads over 25 countries, one of the reasons that is being given for it is the administrative necessity of it. You have to have a central form of some administrative and bureaucratic control when you're sort of, your orders are spreading across a region which is as wide as it's now.
Good
it's no longer
technocratic reasons, the Prime Minister said this week in a ringing endorsement of it, apparently.
And once that happens, it's almost inevitable. Centralization will mean taking away powers from the federating units and concentrating them on the center. I mean, if you're not going to do that in some respect or the other, there's no point in having a central constitution. You could just go on the way you were. And to the extent that you have that, you are going to lose sovereignty.
Is that true from now? I mean, you could say the American situation is you balance what individual states do with what the federal government does, and most power that really affects people in their daily lives is left with the states, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. And also what you said about a constitution, this is more treaty than constitution. When we grew up in the United States, every child could tell you, I could tell you right now, the preamble of the Constitution, we the people of the United States in order to create a more perfect union. And I can do that now, this many years later. No one is going to memorize this Constitution.
Come on, Fred.
No one is going to talk about it.
You might be able to do that, Fred, but can your president?
Probably, actually. I mean, that is the point, though. This list of competences, as it's called, and good technocratic reasons, as the Prime Minister says, doesn't entirely make the heart sing with joy, does it? In terms of what Americans think of their constitutions, this great, wonderful document, almost like poetry.
No, and I mean, and Europe is in many ways its own worst enemy, even more so than Kilroy Silk, because what they've done over the years is come out with a whole load of loony, pettifogging things. As an example today about the length of step ladders. Now, in the great scheme of Europe, the length of step ladders is not one of the great things, is it? I mean, and it's
I'm sure some people care greatly about it.
It's that kind of thing. They can
write to you if they wish to complain.
Yes, it would be awful if you've got a big house. But this kind of thing that gives an easy tabloid headline, you know, an easy headline.
But you could have done very well on it, though, haven't they? I mean, it's very easy to say, we don't really, you know, we don't mind going there for our holidays, Europe, but we certainly don't want to be governed by some bureaucrat bureaucrat from Brussels. It's very simple to sell that message.
It's very easy, and it's the easiest thing in the world to say that they're all corrupt and this sort of thing, and that a great deal of waste comes from it, not least by the UK Independence Party, which only managed to ask one question in 5 years, a cost of nearly £1 million.
It's probably a very good question. Do you happen to know
Nobody
what it
can
was?
remember what it was.
Yes, but meanwhile, well, you know, you're all in your tabloids concentrating on the stepladders or whether they should be straight bananas and all that sort of thing. Meanwhile, you know, Europe is moving on, and of course, this constitution is very wordy. It's typically sort of Irish to Jesuit solution. It's so complicated, everybody can agree to it. But meanwhile, very, very slowly, Europe is getting closer together, and Britain is staying on the outside. And what you can see now is that there is a slow, very slow, and maybe minute movement away towards more power in Brussels and less in the nation states. And of course, Britain has had a lot of rights of vetoes, has kept a lot of vetoes. Holland is very proud because Holland has kept one veto, but in general there is a very slow movement towards getting together, and the British are staying out of it. And if you're looking at it now, it's a slow movement towards a two-tier Europe, because yes, the British don't have to take part in tax harmonization, but those that want can do so. So you will slowly get a group that will be very close together with the euro, maybe tax harmonization, that sort of thing, and Britain will lose out or will stay outside. And if they want to, fine. But
I disagree. I know that's conventional wisdom on the continent, but if you look at this process with the Constitution, Britain saved the Constitution. It saved the Constitution from being more anti-competitive than it actually is, and there are still some very anti-competitive elements in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. As we go on, you may see Poland, Latvia, even France, if Chirac is replaced, coalescing with Britain. No, but coalescing with Britain for some of the things that Britain stands for. So I think you're right. I think Europe will continue to go forward. But the shot across the leadership's bow of this European elections, European voters are not happy with the course Europe is taking. They don't want to give up everything to a center where they have no democratic recall. So either the center has to be more democratic, or you're going to have more votes like the last election.
Yes, I agree there. I agree with that, because of course, even in Holland, which was always the most pro-European Union country of all time, you know, the ordinary voters are getting fed up on for financial reasons, because the euro is more expensive and because we are the biggest net payers per head of the population of the whole European Union. So basically it's financial, practical reasons like often.
But we don't know what's
But we are
happening, do we?
getting more irritated than we were before.
We've just elected a whole raft of MEPs. Virtually nobody in the country either knows who they are or what they do. And we've had a whole election where nobody's enlightened us. So it's hardly surprising that, first of all, you don't get much of a turnout, and those that do vote against it.
And also, I was struck, when you were talking about the trade unionists earlier, I was struck, Shahid, that the British trade unions who complained about the right to strike and they wanted a more European language in this treaty, they were arguing for the rights of European workers, but they certainly were not arguing for European rates of unemployment, which in Western Europe quite often are twice what they are in Britain.
Isn't that the problem with everyone? Everyone wants the gravy, nobody wants the beans along with it. And I think that is very much the situation here. But you know, overall, I must agree with Tina here. Since 1973, when Britain went into what was then the common market, there have been 3 decades. And in 3 decades, Europe has gone much further towards a process of integration. And what Mr. Blair has won, although we're not very clear what exactly he's won, is an opt-out. Now, that's fine. That maybe it'll help him with the elections and so on and so forth. But it doesn't put him at the heart of Europe where he wants to be, or where he says Britain wants to be.
But Fred's suggesting the heart has moved,
the heart may be beginning to move, and it will probably take a lot more than Latvia and Poland, with all due respect to these countries, to move it substantially. We are still... I think the future will lie in the cooperation between France and Germany that you have now. That's not a constant factor that anyone can take for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Mr. Schroeder has not done too well, internally. So 3 years down the line, he may be there or he may not be there. The same may be true of Mr. Chirac.
How could Blair sell this, do you think, in the few minutes we've got left? I mean, what does he have to do? He started today to try to.
He was on David Frost today, and I think he was quite convincing, as he often is. I think he basically is saying, look, this is the future. One way or another, it's the future, and we have no option to opt out. And he has to say, our future is with Europe, and more people are with us, as we were able to show through this constitutional process. And even in relationship to the United States, people talk about the special relationship. If Britain is not really an integral part of Europe, and if it doesn't have influence on Europe, it becomes less important to the United States as well.
Because the United States would far rather Gordon Brown arguing, for example, for freer labour markets and so on, all the kinds of things you were talking about, than being on the outside of Europe saying, we don't
absolutely, like it. Absolutely. Long term, if Britain is outside of Europe, it not only has less influence on Europe, it also has less influence on the world stage. And I think he has to make that sell. At the same time, he's got to push Brussels closer to the voter. Brussels is too far from the voter. No democratic recall, no democratic legitimacy. If that continues...
Yeah, I mean, the Dutch voters agree with that, don't they?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's all over the old Europe, is the complaint from the voters, that they don't have enough influence, that they are not being listened to. And of course, you know, I think that the sad thing about this constitution is that here in this country, Tony Blair will have to sell it not by saying, look what's beautiful in the constitution, but look how much I kept out of it. And the one thing, the one warning, which is really where I agree with you, which Tony Blair can give to the British, is that, yes, the Americans could easily phone Germany when they want to speak to Europe, because everybody in Germany speaks very good English.
But perhaps not in France.
He's also got to take on the right-wing press. You know, the Mail, the Sun, Sunday Times, and he's got to do it. He's got to do it absolutely straight, full in the face.
But he hasn't done it for 7 years.
Know,
he hasn't dared since he was elected.
We'll move on, because that will be an interesting topic in itself. In a moment, school rules for Muslim girls in the West, plus terrorism in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, and as seen from the White House.
Nehru had led India's struggle for independence and laid the foundations of a modern state. The nation mourned, with Indira and her sons. But few imagined that Nehru's daughter and her children would one day wield power.
Hepatitis B is the second biggest cause of vaccine-preventable deaths in the world, and there wasn't a vaccine for it 20 years ago when I started working in this area.
It's the biggest tennis tournament in the world. Watch Wimbledon Fortnight from first serve to championship point, here on BBC World.
Coming up, how air traffic controllers are learning to take to the skies without actually leaving the ground. Tackling phobias, how your PC can now help you overcome your greatest fears.
Business in the Middle East is more than just oil and politics. For the latest finance and business news from this rapidly developing region, join me, Nima Abu Warde, for Middle East Business Report on BBC World.
For those looking for less speed and more luxury, we find out if the Orient Express can keep you on track. And we find out how one company survived the dot-com crash by carving a niche for itself in the internet travel market.
find out what Britain is saying about itself as BBC World brings you a unique weekly showcase of the stories making the news in the United Kingdom. That's UK Report on BBC World.
Many of the US airmen who found themselves on islands like this didn't even have a knife with them. And in some cases, they died because they couldn't open a coconut to get at the food and liquid to be found inside it.
Hello and welcome to Dateline London. Bombs aimed at ordinary Iraqis seeking work, assassinations of prominent Iraqi leaders, the beheading of an American hostage. Attacks aimed at threatening oil supplies. Should Westerners get out of Saudi Arabia, and should more troops be sent to Iraq? Here to discuss it are Fred Kemp of the Wall Street Journal, Shahid Sadullah of Pakistan's Daily Jang, Tina Van Houts of Holland's NOS, and Richard Stott of the Sunday Mirror. 10 days left until the transfer of sovereignty to Iraqis themselves. How optimistic should we be that things will get better in Iraq, and how worried should we be that they could get much worse in Saudi Arabia? Tina.
I think we should be very worried. Of course, we have to keep to the deadline because that's the political deadline set in America, not really there. But of course, we should be very worried because there are no signs that this is a well-organized country where everything is under control. There are no signs that it's very well policed. There are no signs that the outside military are under control. Having control. And of course there are no signs that this country is ready to have a general election, a good one, in January, which is the next step. It's very, very worrying.
Is Fred, is this timetable driven by political considerations in Washington rather than what is necessarily best for the Iraqi people? I mean, even if you accept, as most people do, that the transfer of sovereignty should take place at the end.
I personally believe the transfer of sovereignty should have taken place earlier through a Bonn conference type process, as one did in Afghanistan, and one wouldn't have a lot of the problems we have now. So I think I'm actually more optimistic than you are. There's no doubt that that violence will continue and probably escalate in the next 7 months before the elections in January, particularly from Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia cleric, who has been outside of this process and who will try to position himself in as strong a position as possible before the election, or even throw the elections off and seize power for himself. That being said, Arab governments are now on the side of this new regime. They don't want things to go badly because it's bad for them as well. You now have the UN behind this process. You have Sistani, the leading Shia cleric, behind this process, and he will try to bring in some of al-Sadr's insurgents on his side. But the real problem is security. If you can't create security, if the U.S. and its allies in Iraq can't help this new government create security and put people on the ground to make that security greater, then it's going to be very difficult to get people to work for this government, to be able to...
Those are the ones that are getting killed.
We're having trouble just getting our reporters, you know, protected by armed guards from their house to press conferences. I mean, it's a very dicey security situation.
Shahid, is the Pakistan's government view, however we got here, that obviously it's now got to work, something has got to work in Iraq?
I'm sure everybody hopes that it's got to work. But the point is that, you know, security is as much a physical issue as it is a political issue. And much of what is going to happen is going to depend on what is the perception of genuine sovereignty having been restored to the people of Iraq after the 30th of June. That depends on how things work. I think there has been a very encouraging statement by Muqtada al-Sadr day before yesterday when he said that it's all very well for the government to come in, but they should listen more to the people of Iraq than to the United States government. Now that does mean that he has accepted the government there. He has been, I think the reason for this is that he has been given very positive vibes about the elections and he'll be able to contest them. If he contests them, and many of his people do come into power, would that be acceptable? I have my personal doubts about those elections as well, how acceptable they are going to be to the people of Iraq. And on that will depend which way Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani goes. And that is going to be the crucial factor in Iraq. So, of course, all this is tied up to the timetable here. I mean, what happens in the United States in November? And does Mr. Bush carry on? Does Mr. Kerry come in? What sort of a government does he have? What sort of a policy does he have on Iraq? But at the moment, certainly everybody is hoping that this works, but in order to make it work, there must be a political sort of conviction that, yes, this is a general transfer of sovereignty. And with 155,000 foreign troops there, I don't see how that general conviction is going to come.
Quite likely more British troops on the way, it seems.
Yes, quite possibly. Certainly security is clearly a big matter. But people want the ordinary things of life, like electricity back, and they want sewage, and it's been a long time now, and they still haven't got the basic services working properly. So they're going to be extremely upset by this, inevitably. And as a result of that, the terrorists will gain ground. They've only got to hit people who work for the government. They've got to hit ordinary people. It's so easy to destabilize a country that's all at the moment in terrible problems.
And there's a sense of grievance, obvious sense of grievance you can capitalize on.
That's right. And then you've got Saudi Arabia next door, where you can see that the whole thing is teetering there. I think it is really, really severe problems, all of which could have easily been foreseen.
How worried should we be about Saudi Arabia, do you think?
I think we should be terribly worried. I think that both Iraq and Saudi Arabia, perhaps the biggest danger over time is the cynicism and the skepticism of the West, and the cynicism and skepticism of the transatlantic community, because we're the only people now that can really take on these issues. Saudi Arabia and the problems there are born of our hypocrisy. For too many years we've backed a regime that was providing us oil in the expectation that they would stay stable and everything would be fine. But while at the same time those oil dollars were being used to promote the most fanatical, radical Islamist ideology, the Wahhabi ideology, which has now poisoned an entire generation of minds. We've allowed that to happen. And now the Saudi regime is paying the price. It may be a slow burn. It may not be a revolution that changes things overnight, and that's the more likely case. There will be an official backlash. They will go after these people, and they will go after them in a very strong way. But their fate is so tightly tied with Wahhabi fundamentalism that they have to take on Wahhabi fundamentalism ultimately to win, and ultimately for us to win. But will they do that? That's very difficult.
How can they do that? Because it's the basis, as I understand, of the whole education system there. The Wahhabis their ideas are taught in all the schools. And if you look at the statistics, 2/3 of the Saudis are under 25. So the whole young generation, 2/3 of the country, has been educated in that system. And yes, today the Saudi government says we're getting it under control, we've killed this leader, there's only about 1,000 or 2,000 Al-Qaeda people there, but 2/3 of the population have been really educated in a very fanatical way through the ordinary schools. And most of these people, they might have a bit of money, but they don't really have jobs, they don't have much to do.
And to use Fred's word, Shahid, the word hypocrisy, that will have to continue, because from the West's point of view, they may disapprove of some of the things about the Saudi regime, but all possible alternatives at this moment would be worse.
The real hypocrisy, in my view, Gavin, was not so much the support of the Saudi government. I think that was economic factors that necessitated it. It was the backing of fundamentalist, very right-wing Islamic elements in the fight in Afghanistan. I think that there are people who are being hunted by the United States now who were feted on the lawns of the White House at that time. And that was what really made this sort of thing not only acceptable, but essential for the West. That was needed.
But I disagree. One could have moved this regime in a more pluralistic and inclusive direction. What we said for years is this region, Islam, was not conducive to democracy.
Perhaps we could have moved it.
That's the policy that we have to change.
We could have moved it, but I'm not quite sure, even if we did move it a few notches, we wouldn't be exactly where we are today.
But this brings us back to Iraq, because if we don't go in as the West, as Europe and the United States, and say, look, it's our common cause that this goes well. You said that it won't be viewed as sovereign if there are so many troops in the country. I disagree completely. The more Western troops, Gulf troops, world troops from whatever countries who come in and try to help this regime establish itself ahead of elections in January, the more legitimacy it will have on the world stage.
But they will not go there.
We're also trying to create an instant democracy, aren't we, in a country that hasn't had it, and it is going to take generations to do that. But because of the politics driven by Washington, he needs instant success, preferably before November. And he's just not going to get it.
Certainly you have to put a process in that's sustainable. It would make no sense not to have a sustainable process. But that's only going to be, it's only going to be sustainable in Afghanistan or Iraq with a large international security.
But
Afghanistan's back to where it was in the first place.
Yeah, and then the international force is not going to come forth, Fred, because until and unless people are absolutely convinced that the government is genuinely Iraqi government and is free to do as it pleases. 3 days ago, there was a reported statement that the foreign minister of Pakistan had said, yes, we are willing to send troops to Iraq to support the UN there. Within 2 days, he had to retract it. No, we didn't say anything like that.
Let's move on to a related issue, because the American Presidential Commission investigating the attacks on September the 11th concluded this week something people in the Arab world will say they knew already, that despite some contacts between Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein's regime, the Iraqis did not sponsor al-Qaeda and had no hand in the September the 11th attacks. But this week, both the US Vice President Dick Cheney and President Bush himself emphasized there were links, though not direct Iraqi involvement in 9/11. What's going on? Fred?
Well, because I knew this was coming up, I brought Dick Cheney's words and also those from the Commission because I think it's important to get this right. What Cheney is saying is there's no fundamental split. He's saying the press is reporting this, but there's not a fundamental split. And in a way, he's right, because he's saying whether or not what the Commission was saying is whether or not the Iraqis were involved in 9/11 with al-Qaeda. What Cheney is saying and what Bush is saying is that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there is a level of involvement of some sort, and then they